Hi, my name is Nathan. This is Nice at Dice, and today I'm taking a look at a game called Small Star Empires. This is a relatively simple, abstract area control style game with a light Space Empires theme to it. So I'm going to give you an idea how the game is played, and then we'll come back here and I will tell you my thoughts on it. So I have set up here a game of Small Star Empires for 3 players. As you can see, there's a sort of a main board over here where the play takes place, and you have a smaller board off to the side where you track the player's scores. You can see you have numbers going from 0 all the way around to 50, and you have these small wooden discs that you use to track the score throughout the game. The object of the game, of course, is to have the most points when the game ends, and the game ends when nobody can make a legal move. Now the main board is modular. It's made up of tiles like this one with these individual hex spaces, which are called systems. And many of the systems are like these, where you have a small dot in the center and then larger dots that represent planets circling the smaller dot, which represents a star. And you have these concentric circles representing the orbits of those planets. But the thing that's really important about these graphics is just the number of those larger dots representing planets. So this, for example, is a 1-planet system. This would be a 4-planet system, a 2-planet system, and so forth. And that's important because that affects scoring. The board, like I said, is modular. It's made up of a bunch of these tiles. So this is just one way you can set up the board. This is how they recommend you set up the board if you're playing with 3 players, but they have different recommended setups for different numbers of players, and they also suggest experimenting and trying different setups with the board to see how that affects the gameplay, and to just find something that you enjoy using. Now, players each have a number of pieces in their color. They have these little ships. In a 3-player game, you get 3 of them, but the number of ships changes with the number of players. And then you have these little pieces here, which are called colonies or cities. And you have these little pieces here, which are called trade stations. Okay, so everybody has a selection of those types of pieces. And on your turn, what you do is really very simple. You're going to choose one of your ships. You're going to move that ship as far as you like in one direction. And then you're going to stop on a system that has yet to be colonized, and you are going to place either a colony or a station on that system. So you could, for example, do something like this. Take this ship, move it as far as you like, place it right here on this system, and put a colony there. Now the reason to do this is because you score points based on putting out your colonies and stations. So in this example, the yellow player just put out a colony on a 3-planet system, so he will immediately gain 3 points, which he tracks over here. So the number of points he gained was equal to the number of planets in the system. So that's basically what you're doing on your turn, but there's a few different types of systems out here. You have systems with various numbers of planets, but you also have systems that have nebulas in them. So you can see there's like some blue nebulas here and here and here. You have 3 red nebulas, and you have 3 green nebulas. So this red player, for example, could just move a ship over here to this green nebula and place one of his colonies there. When he does that, he doesn't score any points immediately, but he takes one of these tokens for the green nebulas, and he hangs on to that. And at the end of the game, he will score points based on the number of green nebula tokens he has. So it's 2 points for 1, 5 points for 2, and 8 points for 3. So the more you have of the same color, obviously, the more that they'll be worth at the end of the game. Another little wrinkle in all of this is you have these trade stations. So the green player, for example, could move here and build a trade station on that spot. Now the trade station doesn't score any points right away, but at the end of the game, the trade station will score points based on the number of opponents' cities or stations around it. So like, for example, at the end of the game, this green trade station would score 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points for each of the cities or stations around it that do not belong to the same player. So it wouldn't score a point for this one, it would score a point for all of those. That'd be 5 points for the green player at the end of the game. Now there are a few rules about moving. You can move as far as you like in a straight line, but you cannot change directions mid-movement. You can't do something like that, for example. That would not be a legal move. You cannot move through a space that has an opponent's city or station. So for example, the yellow player couldn't move through this space that's occupied by a red city and stop there. That would be not a legal move. You can't stop your movement on a space that already has one of your own cities or stations, although you can move through that. So you could go from here to here, but you couldn't stop on either of these systems again. And you cannot normally stop on your home system, which is where your ships start out. But apart from those restrictions to movement, that's basically all of the rules of the game. And like I said, the game ends when nobody can make a legal move. Perhaps you've been hemmed in by your opponents and you cannot move any of your ships past the various systems that they have claimed. Or perhaps you have just placed all of your cities and stations on the board, and so you can no longer move and place a city or station. And then at the end of the game, whoever has the most points is the winner. Again, points are earned throughout the game by placing your cities or colonies on systems with planets. Points are scored at the end of the game based on the number of nebula tokens you have of each color. Points are scored at the end of the game based on the number of your opponent's cities and stations surrounding one of your trade stations. And then additionally, whoever has the largest contiguous area. So for example, we already have some red cities and stations on the board. Let's say at the end of the game, the red player had something like this. He's got all these different systems that he controls and they're all connected to one another. That's a contiguous area. Whoever has the largest contiguous area scores some additional points. And again, whoever has the most points at the end of the game is the winner. Now there are some variants you can add to the game, and I do recommend using some of these variants. And basically it revolves around some additional tiles that you can add to the board. So they have these tiles which are double-sided. You have a wormhole on one side, a black hole on the other. You can place these in any of these empty systems, which normally do nothing. They're not worth points for placing a city there. They might be a good place to place a station, but otherwise they don't do anything. So you could place a black hole there. Black holes are basically just solid obstacles. You can't stop on them, you can't move through them. Or you could flip it over and you could make that a wormhole, and then you need at least one other wormhole somewhere on the board, but you could have multiple wormholes on the board if you like. And the way wormholes work is if you are in a system adjacent to a wormhole, for your turn, you can move your ship onto the wormhole and then come out of any other wormhole and move to any system adjacent to that wormhole. So for example, you could move basically from here into this wormhole and then out of this wormhole to this system, and that's where you would stop and you could build a city or colony there. So that's how wormholes work, and they do really open up the board, allow for a lot of interesting movement options as you play. And they even suggest, if you're using wormholes, to split up the board, have like a small board over here, one over there, one over here, and connect them by wormholes, and make that basically the only way you can move between these, multiple mini boards. So that's an option that you can use. Another variant involves something called Unexplored Systems. So there's about 15 of these tiles that have this back on them. The idea is that you shuffle them up at the beginning of the game and you place them out randomly on the empty systems. And these unexplored systems remain concealed until somebody moves on to them. So for example, this player could move onto this one, and then we would flip it over and see what it is. And so there's a variety of what these unexplored systems could be. So I'll explain just a few of them. I won't explain every one of them, but for example, there are two of them that are just systems with planets like this, so you can build cities on them and get points. There are a couple that are these multicolored nebulas. So when you build a city on one of these multicolored nebulas, you don't get a nebula token right away, but instead at the end of the game, for each of these you have built a city on, you can score as if you had an extra nebula token of any one color. So you can kind of build on these earlier in the game and then wait and see at the end what color nebula would be most useful to you to get a better score from those. So that's another type of thing that can be on there. Quite a few of these tiles are actually these asteroid fields. So if you have an asteroid field here and you move onto this unexplored sector and you flip it over and you realize it's an asteroid field, what you're going to do is you're going to damage your ship, and you indicate that by turning your ship on its side like so. And now that your ship is damaged, it can only move 2 spaces at a time, or up to 2 spaces. It could move 1, it could move 2. So it has been limited now into how far it can move. However, this is the only situation where you can move one of your ships back onto your home sector. So you can move a damaged ship onto your home sector, and then at the end of its movement, it is repaired, and it's now treated like any other ship. After someone has moved onto and revealed one of these asteroid fields, it's now basically just an obstacle. You can't move through it, you can't stop on. And then there are a variety of other tiles for these unexplored systems. And these are some stations that you can discover that have already been built, and you take control of them when you discover them, and they do something for you. And then there are these 3 which basically affect scoring in some way. 2 of them affect your scoring positively, and 1 of them has a negative effect on scoring. So there's a variety of effects that can be had from these unexplored systems. So hopefully that's a good overview of what to expect from the game. One thing I want to point out about the production of the game, I like the production of the game overall. Even the tiles that you use to make up the board and so forth are a nice thickness, just nice quality. But the player pieces that I showed you, those little plastic ships and cities and trade stations, those are exclusive to the deluxe version of the game, which I received from backing the Kickstarter project for this game about 3 years ago. But the retail version of the game will come with just wooden components instead. So they're simpler, not as flashy, but functionally the same. And I do believe there are copies of the deluxe edition still available from Archona Games on their web store. I'll put a link to that in the description of this video in case you're interested. But again, the retail version is functionally the same. Now, this game is very simple, it's very small, and very straightforward. And what I mean by that, it does fit in a relatively small box. It doesn't take up a ton of space on the table. It's quick to set up, it's quick to teach, and it's relatively quick to play. You can get a game in about 20 minutes. So I like that it is all those things, and I like that those things are proportional to each other. So I don't mind a game that's much longer, or even a game that takes longer to set up or teach, but I like the fact that because this is about a 20-minute game, it's also quick to set up, quick to teach, comes in a small box. All of those things being proportional to each other is just very satisfying to me. It means it fits very nicely into my collection. It doesn't take up a lot of space, and it doesn't take up a lot of time. So I like that. I also like how the game is very nuanced in its strategies. Even though it's a very simple game, what you're doing on your turn is super simple. You just move and put a piece on the board. But because of the different elements on the board, it can create a lot of nuance. And because of the way those elements affect scoring. So for example, the obvious strategy is to go after those systems that have like 3 planets, because that's 3 points every time you colonize one of those. But at the same time, you want to try and keep your systems that you colonize close together, so you have that largest contiguous area at the end of the game for some extra points. The nebulas are very tempting, because if you can get 3 of the same color, then that's a good chunk of points at the end of the game. And then you also have those trade stations, which are very situational in how many points they're going to give you. And it's always a kind of a toss-up of, do I put them out early in spots where I know people are going to want to build around them, so I can get that, like, I can get my station in that prime spot for a station before someone else puts a station there? Or do I wait and see how things are developing on the board and then throw out a station later at a spot where I can see, you know, okay, people have already built around this spot, that'd be a good spot for a station. So it's kind of a toss-up. Sometimes it's good to do one, sometimes it's good to do the other. And you can prioritize all of those different ways of scoring points in any given game. So I like all of that nuance to how the game is played, and therefore the strategies that come from those different ways of scoring points. Another thing about the game is this variance. The black hole variant I'm not a big fan of. I think just having a spot on the board that is impassable is not super exciting. But the wormholes are interesting. Having the wormholes allow you to split up the board into kind of different islands, so to speak, that the players can jump between. That's really interesting. Having each player start out on a different one of those separate boards can make for a really fascinating game experience. But also those unexplored system tiles. They add a little bit of randomness to a game where otherwise everybody has perfect information of who's doing what's going on. And so that little extra bit of randomness is interesting. You have that little bit of feeling of like pushing your luck when you go onto one of those. Maybe you'll get something good, maybe it'll be something bad. In the beginning of the game, you might find that players are sort of avoiding them, but after a while you're running out of other places to go, so you have to go for them and hope that you get something good. So that's interesting. I like that. So yeah, taken all together, I like that it's a small game, quick to set up, quick to teach, quick to play, but it has that nuance to it. I like the variants, especially with the unexplored systems that add that little bit of randomness to an otherwise, very straightforward game. And so, yeah, overall, if any of that sounds interesting to you, the sort of abstract area control type of game, then I definitely recommend it. It's a fine game. Now, what makes Small Star Empires really shine, though, is the expansions for the game. There are several expansions for the game that were all released together as part of the Kickstarter project for the game. I have most of the expansions, and so I am going to be doing another video in which I review those expansions, show you what they add to the game, and then kind of give you a more overall impression of the game, including its expansions. So you can look for that video to come up soon. I don't normally say this in my videos, but if that sounds interesting to you and you want to make sure you don't miss it, you could subscribe, you could hit that bell so you get notified when my videos come up, and that video will be coming up in the next few days. So thank you again so much for watching. My name is Nathan. This is Nice at Dice, and you enjoy the rest of your day.